Welcome back to Aviation Intrigue. Today we have a very intriguing guest. We are honored to have Dr. Amanda Stahl with us. Amanda, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Those of you listening and watching, if you don't know Amanda, please look her up. She's got a fascinating career. To start with, she is a MD. She is a physician. She's a hospitalist at a fairly big hospital up in upstate New York. I will let her expand on that. And she's also a pilot, which is a common theme here in Aviation Intrigue. So we're going to talk a lot about her piloting and her medical career and how they work together. She is an expert skier. She used to be an instructor in Vail for a number of years. We're going to get into her pottery and artistry and singing and all kinds of things. Amanda, welcome. And what do you think? Is that a fair introduction?
I think so. Yes.
And I don't mean to start this in a bad light or anything, but recently, like less than a couple of weeks ago, you had a little bit of a medical scare, right? What happened, and what can you tell us about that?
I did. Yes. As the other doctors say, I was on the other side of the IV as the patient myself. I had two bad infections, cholangitis and cholecystitis. So basically, I had an infection in the common bile duct and infection in the gallbladder, all precipitated by stones in the gallbladder. Essentially, I had to undergo an endoscopic procedure to remove some of the stones from my common bile duct, and then I underwent a robotic cholecystectomy, removal of the gallbladder. And you know, it's the only surgery I've ever had in my life, and it was scary. I was very sick, and everything happened very suddenly. Actually, when I first started having some severe symptoms, I was at work right next to the emergency room, which was fortunate. And my blood pressure was suddenly very low. I almost passed out. And the other doctors that I work with, who were in the office with me, ushered me over to the emergency room right across the hall. And that's how the whole thing started. So I had those procedures done on March 17th and March 19th, and I feel much better now. But yeah, it was an adventure, one that I hope not to repeat.
I'm glad to hear that you're really recovering quickly. Is that something that could have had other implications down the road? Were the case to be worse, or if you didn't get the surgery done in time?
I mean, it's something that, just like really any infection, essentially, could it be fatal? Yes. Was I very sick? Yes. I think sometimes it's hard when you don't work in the medical field to see that surgeries don't always turn out the way that, they're not as simple as you might think. It's not as simple as, well, I'm just going to take out that organ and I'll be fine. There are an awful lot of things that can go wrong in the process. It was scary. I think for me, I hate being or feeling like I'm out of control, that I can't control the situation myself, that I can't fix it myself. I was in a very vulnerable position, I think, because of that. On the same vein, I think it's probably particularly useful because of my job, just to see what it feels like to be in that position. There's no better way to do that than to experience it yourself. And I think of myself as a very empathetic person, but to have the experience myself and be able to understand how patients feel powerless and afraid in a situation like that was really great in retrospect.
So I think you partially answered my question, but is it easy for physicians and doctors to get sick, or is it harder?
Well, that's a good question. I think the mentality in medical school and residency and beyond is that, you better suck it up. You're expected to show up pretty much unless you're dead. And that, unfortunately, even though I think there's a more of a focus these days on wellness and taking care of yourself as the clinician, that mentality, that undercurrent is still present. And I don't think that that has changed in a significant way, despite all of the years that have gone by.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it sounds like if you're a medical professional, you know everything that's going on. So it's kind of hard to be oblivious to that, right? So if the good, bad, the ugly, you just know about it.
Yes, I think it's hard when you're aware of every single thing that can go wrong. And of course, when I was in the situation myself, that's all I could think about. Well, this can go wrong, that can go wrong, and sometimes that can be of some benefit if you are a patient and you don't have any connection to healthcare in any way. So it's just totally unfamiliar. It might seem more black and white, but nothing in medicine is black and white. Similar to flying and probably everything else in life. There are many gray areas, and I think that's what makes it scary, but yet also fascinating. And those are the things about medicine and aviation and all of the other pursuits that I've had that really intrigue me the most.
Really well said. Do you feel that going back to a medical practice right after that happened, that you had a slightly different perspective on things than having been the patient in a traumatic situation?
I think so. Like I said, more than anything, it was interesting in the first few shifts that I worked after all of this happened. I admitted multiple patients with similar problems who were going to end, yes, who would be likely undergoing all of the same procedures that I underwent, and I actually, most of them, when it came up in conversation, they said, well, how is this going to go? How is that going to go? How am I going to feel? How will I get back to work? So it was useful to me to be able to say, well, let me tell you, the same thing just happened to me. And here's what I experienced as the patient. Because I think beforehand, at least with this particular type of illness, I would say, well, this is what the statistics show. This is what I've seen anecdotally in my own practice. And I've been in practice, I'm going to turn 48 this year. I've been in practice for a while now, plenty long enough to have seen a fair amount. And I think it's different for the patient, though, to hear, oh, wow, this happened to you. I think they appreciate your opinion that much more.
So does it help them bond better with you as a physician? I would think so, right?
I hope so. I mean, it certainly, I think it is a way for you to form an additional connection with another person. And, that human connection really is the thing that attracts me to medicine the most. It always has been. I started out in obstetrics and gynecology, and as much as I loved women's healthcare and surgery, I felt that I was really missing that ability to spend a lot of time talking to a patient. And working as a hospitalist, I primarily admit patients, so I'm really getting them at the front end. And I get to hear the whole story. I get to understand things about their lives and what's been going on lately that got them into the emergency room and needing to be admitted to the hospital. So yes, it's the connection definitely, I think, is improved by having your own story about your own problem that might be relevant to the case.
And then moving forward to some of your other activities, I know I've suffered injuries in the past where one of the first things I get around to thinking about when I'm recovering is, oh, when I can get back to skiing, when I can get back to my running and hiking and all of that. How are you feeling moving forward? And is that something that you're going to be able to jump back into, hopefully?
Yes, well, actually, I already have. So I will preface this with I think this is what I've been told by my surgeon and GI doctor. I'm very out of the ordinary, so I don't want people to listen to this and think that this is what most people do. I did go back to work on post-op day number 2. I was then off for a few days, and most people would be off for at least 2 weeks. And I was also told, I mean, I don't have anything to compare it to, but I was told that I have a very abnormally high tolerance for pain, which might be why maybe I had subtle symptoms prior to the everything really going south that I just brushed off as nothing. And regardless, so I did go back to work on post-op day 2. Then I was off for a few days, and then I worked, my usual schedule beyond that time. And I felt, in retrospect, post-op day 2 might have been a little bit more than I should have attempted, but my restrictions in terms of exercise, I'm very into my exercise regimen. I do high intensity interval training and yoga, with a lot of difficult poses. Normally I do that at least 6 days a week. So to try to step back and not do anything immediately was a little bit tough for me. But what I was told is I was allowed to, at least for the first couple of days, walk. I did a 2-mile, like a slow 2-mile walk outside. And I was allowed to start doing something like an elliptical trainer, which is what I have at home. So I did that starting on post-op day 4, took it very slow, and then I continued to build up with that. And I was allowed to lift beyond 15 pounds 3 weeks out from surgery. So I'm back to all of my usual things now. I feel good with regard to that. And in terms of flying, so the surgeon had cleared me to fly on post-op day 4. I actually had a reservation that day in one of our flying club planes, but I didn't feel that I was quite as mobile as I thought was reasonable. I knew I could sit down and use my arms and legs, but I was worried that, I'm used to climbing up on top of the airplane, looking in the fuel tanks. And I thought, I just don't feel like I can move around quite the way I want. So I ended up flying on post-op day 7 because as I started to improve, it was pretty dramatic. And I had no difficulty then moving around. I didn't feel like I was putting pressure on an incision or anything like that. It was turbulent the first day that I flew. And I did, that was the only time I've flown since. So I was getting jostled around a little bit. I noticed it. I wouldn't say I was uncomfortable, but it was, I was jostled a little more than I was expecting. That was just, weather phenomena. But in terms of, what I have to do for the FAA, so I have a class 2 medical certificate, and I would be due, because I'm over 40, I have to do it every year. And I checked with my AME just to be safe, and he said no, that it's considered a routine surgery. I was actually not admitted to the hospital. I was able to accomplish all of this as an outpatient. And he said all that I have to do is at my next appointment bring a letter from the surgeon saying that she's cleared and doesn't have to follow up any further. And I already am. But it is I will say it's anxiety provoking, when this whole thing happened. Of course, I'm like Googling everything, thinking like, oh my God, is this, it's not a disqualifying condition to have cholecystitis and surgery like an appendectomy, for example, or a cholecystectomy. None of these are disqualifying, and they're generally considered to be a curative procedure. So as long as you recover from the surgery and you're okay, then this is not something that the FAA regards as a problem.
Yeah, I was going to say that if anybody tuned in and did not know why you're on the show, now they know exactly. There's so much inspiration in there to be able to get out of a fairly life-changing medical scare and put that behind you. 2 days, 3 days later, you're back in an airplane doing what you want to do. That's fantastic. Kudos to you.
I think I haven't really been able to put this to the test in the past, but I feel very strongly that it's important to set a good example in terms of healthy lifestyle choices. You know, I tell my patients to do these things, that there's no pill, there's nothing that's going to replace how you treat your body on a daily basis. I also am frequently telling my patients things like, you know, you're gonna bounce back from whatever it is much faster and much more easily if you start out in good shape. You're eating well, you're sleeping enough, you've controlled your stress, you exercise, you have meaningful connections with other people. I think, you know, all of that stuff just benefited me greatly.
I'm amazed that you said this was the first physical trauma or injury that you've experienced, and with the championship skiing and skiing racing and skiing instructor, I'm just amazed that you hadn't had a skiing accident, or had you had any close calls where you could have been injured, because that's really great that you can say that.
Yes, I know. I should knock on wood. I think, you know, I have, and I definitely had my fair share of spectacular falls where I've cartwheeled down the mountain. I did that once when I was in uniform in Vail. I had dropped off a client halfway up the mountain. I finished with my morning private lesson, and I had to meet someone at the base. And I was gonna, you know, I was already like a few minutes late. So I just went hurling down in flat light. And as I was almost down to the bottom, there was like a death cookie that I didn't see, and somehow I don't even know what happened. All I know is that like I said, cartwheeled down the rest of, you know, this entire face. And believe it or not, anytime that I've had anything like that happen, you know, in a race course or on the hill, I have, knock on wood, been lucky enough to never have more than a bruise. I've never damaged a helmet either, despite having opportunities for that to have happened. I've never had a run-in with a tree. You know, I think maybe I'm just lucky. The only other thing I have to offer is that it's an interesting phenomenon. I think and this probably applies to other sports as well. When you fall or something happens that isn't what you're anticipating, if you have this ability to let your body kind of ragdoll, you're less likely to get injured. And I think part of that ties into your confidence and your fear about the situation. I've been skiing since I was 4 years old. And I think even though I might have a split second thought like, oh, I might get hurt, that doesn't overwhelm me. And so maybe I just have some ability to not tense up. It's the same way that I'm sure both of you have seen people who are driving while they're intoxicated. A lot of times they're not the people that get injured in car accidents. And that's part of the reason, you know, they've like lost their inhibitions to such a degree that their body doesn't tense up in response to a trauma, which is a weird phenomenon. But anyway, I think that's it. Just that I am able to stay relaxed to some degree.
What an amazing story. We got a lot more stories to get into, so we'll do that in the next segment.
So, Amanda, while we were talking a little bit about your story and your medical career, you did mention that you're a pilot. And so we definitely wanted to ask, how did you get into flying, and what have you been doing lately with that?
So it's an interesting story. So when I was ski instructing in Vail, I was there for 3 seasons full time. That was starting in the winter of 99, 2000, and up until the end of the 2002 season. So obviously you can't ski in the summer in Vail. You can ski pretty late into the season. And in the midst of this, I started working as a paramedic also. And I did that during the summer. But the second summer that I was out there, I was like, you know what? I'm going to learn how to fly an airplane. And so I thought, let me call up Eagle County Regional Airport and see if they have a flight school. I did no research. You know, this was before the internet. Like, I didn't have a cell phone where I could look everything up. So I called them up, and in fact, they had a little flight school called Due West Aviation. And I set up a lesson the next day, and I loved it, and I continued to pursue that. And interestingly, so I was supposed to go to my check ride it was scheduled right after the September 11th attacks actually happened. So as I'm sure you both remember, the skies were closed to general aviation for some months. So I ended up, obviously, the check ride got canceled. And then I had this hiatus in training. So I came back, I worked in the beginning of December for a couple of weeks with my instructor to make sure I hadn't forgotten everything. And then I went to my private check ride on December 26th of 2001. And so then this flying club had two airplanes. They were both Cessna 172 SPs. I didn't realize how spoiled I was at the time. They were brand new, like leather interior. They were great. You know, people owned these airplanes and leased them to the flight school. And the people that owned them never flew them. So, I flew, I did a fair amount of solo flight in and around Vail, Grand Junction, Rifle, Hayden, Steamboat Springs. And then as I was getting more comfortable, I was like, I need something else to learn here. So I decided to start working on my instrument rating that spring. And the instrument instructor that I had I was very lucky to get him. He was a captain I think he flew for Frontier. I can't remember if it was Frontier or United, but he had been laid off after September 11th. So he ended up working as a CFI I think it was just about a year. And he was my instrument instructor. So someone who had a massive amount of experience, flew the Airbus in and out of Denver. And then I really breezed through my instrument rating. I think of everything, I thought that was the easiest. And this is always how I am. The things that other people think are harder, I think are easier. And then the stuff that everybody else thinks is easy, for some reason, is harder for me. And that has been the same with every exam I've taken in medicine, etc. Passed all of that, and then I started medical school in August of 2002. And I had gone to my check ride a week before that. So fast forward, medical school, I flew. I did not maintain my currency, hardly flew at all through those 4 years. And then eventually I did a family medicine residency in upstate New York. That's how I ended up here. And my husband was working his first surgery job at the time. And I finally had some more money when I finished that residency, and I had an attending salary. And in 2017, I was, what am I doing with my life? I need to get back to flying. And that's how I got attached to Condair Flyers. And I've been a member there since, I think maybe November of 2017. And through those years, I just started flying more and more and more. And I'm always somebody that the more interested I get in something, the better I want to get. And I want to just keep increasing my skill set. Anyway, I embarked on my commercial adventure with Dan. I was his first student, and his first student to pass a check ride. We started working on it in the spring of 2023. And I went to that check ride in the middle of October in 23. And then at that point, I had already started thinking, kind of thinking bigger, that I wanted to learn how to fly a bigger, faster airplane with an extra engine, especially after having had a partial engine failure myself. That was before.
Wait, what?
So I had a partial engine failure in one of our flying club airplanes, my favorite airplane. That was in April of 2022, and again, had I had an extra engine, it might have been a little bit easier to manage. But since it was a single engine plane, that was something that was pretty scary.
So what happened? What happened?
So it was April. I think it was April 2nd of 2022. It was day I was off from work. Had a reservation in my favorite airplane in the flying club, 854 Golf Whiskey, and it was a nice day. The winds were well aligned with runway 28 at Albany International, and I was planning to take a sunset flight westward to, I can't even remember where I was planning to go now. But in any event, I was going to take a short cross country, about 80 nautical miles to the west. And I ran, I'm very meticulous with all of my checklists. I talk everything out loud. I fly by myself a lot. I like to do that. So I went through all of my checklists like I normally do. I didn't identify any problems. Got to the run-up pad, did my run-up checklist, and the weather was not. It was sunny, very, very VFR, visual flight rules, and so I got cleared to take off on runway 28. I took off. It was a little turbulent, and I just had a bad feeling. I cannot say that anything looked awry, but I had a bad feeling, and I still remember it very clearly, that something wasn't right. So I had asked for a cruising altitude of 4,500 feet. So I got up to my cruising altitude. Everything seemed fine. And at the moment, I was exactly 22 nautical miles away from Albany. Suddenly, my RPMs went from like 2,500 to 1,800. The engine made a horrible noise I will never forget. I lost about 500 feet of altitude, and I will never forget this entire experience. Just immediately think, oh my God, something horrible just happened. We're fortunate in that airplane to have an instrument that gives you a lot of information about what's going on with the engine, the G2 Insight. So the moment this happened, I look over to this gauge, which is right to the left, and see that I completely lost the third cylinder. The little bar just went down to zero. So I went to a rich mixture, full power, and I immediately said, okay, where am I? What's the closest place for me, to get the airplane on the ground? At this point, I was able to maintaining 4,000 feet. But I knew that there was a chance, of course, that I could lose the rest of the cylinders, and then I would then I would be a glider. So I had a pretty significant headwind on that particular day. I was 11 nautical miles from Fulton County's airport, which does not have fire and rescue, and I was 22 from Albany, which obviously has everything that you would need in an emergency. And I was a little bit closer to Schenectady, which also had fire and rescue. So I had to make a quick decision. And I got on the radio with Albany Approach. I was still talking to them. And I said, listen, I'm having some trouble with my engine. I want to come back to the field. So my thought at the time was, I think, I would be better off heading back towards the airports that have fire and rescue, because if something goes wrong, I'm not going to have that available at Fulton County, number one. And number two, I knew that if I backtracked right along the path that I had taken, I would go over, like every couple of miles, I would be over a private airfield where I could land. Most of them were grass strips, but it was, was still at least 3 more hours of daylight, and totally clear day. So that was the decision I made in the moment. I also thought if I had gone to Fulton County, I would have to fight against a significant headwind, and that may be more of an impediment, whereas I would have a big tailwind to help me get back to Albany. So I told Albany Approach what was going on, and I headed back towards the field. and it was very, very uncoordinated. The whole cowling was just vibrating and shaking around. I remember, as I would get directly over these different airfields that I'm talking about, how much relief I felt, because every step along the way, I was thinking, at any moment I could lose everything. And I know that that's possible. So as I got closer to Albany, I was getting more confident. I still had 3 of the 4 cylinders functioning, and I was able to, when I look back at my path on FlightAware, you can see that I had lost at most a couple of 100 feet along the way, but I was doing a pretty good job of maintaining altitude. So I knew that would give me more leeway if I did become a glider at any moment. So. At this point, the wind was, I don't know, maybe about 15 knots out of the west. And of course, Albany's still using runway 28, but it was going to be a little bit further trek for me to get to the threshold of that runway versus runway 1. I was a little closer. So they offered runway 1 to me, and I thought, oh no, now I'm going to have this terrible crosswind that was gusting on top of it. But I thought, at the last minute, there's no reason that I can't handle that. And that's the closer runway. And now that I'm finally like in the little bubble where I know that even if I lose the engine, I can get down to that runway, there's no reason not to take it. So I said, yep, I'll take runway 1. And as I descended down, and I stayed I ditched a lot of altitude at the last minute, which I did on purpose. In any event, I thought that as I was on short final that I lost the 2nd cylinder, and actually, so on the G2 Insight, the little bar that correlates to that had also gone down to 0. But when they analyzed everything after the fact, it didn't look like anything was wrong with the 2nd cylinder. So I'm still not sure why that happened. But in any case, I landed the plane without any difficulty. Hands were shaking. They had asked me if I needed assistance. And I said, no, everything was okay. So I taxied over to Hangar 1 outside of customs, parked the airplane, didn't even take my seatbelt off, but shut everything down. And I called our maintenance officer and said, something really bad happened. He came over, he lives very close to the airport, came over, we took the cowling off, and it was as he had suspected, a bent push rod. That was behind the whole thing. So that's my story.
Wow, what a story. I'm sitting at the edge of my seat. Obviously, I know how it turned out. So it's like watching a movie that I know how it ends. But oh my goodness, Amanda, I cannot but help think the connection between your previous story with your medical scare and this, it's being calm, being prepared, being well trained, executing everything methodically. That's probably what kept you alive after your medical scare. That's probably what keeps you here after your engine scare.
Yeah, I think, I think this applies to pretty much everything in life. You just can't freak out. You're not going to function well. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. There's an interesting thing I'll tie in here that particularly as of late I've gotten very interested in, and that's a flow state. And this is a mindset that's described that basically, I'm trying to think how to describe it. So when you're in a state where you are functioning probably better than you normally could, everything seems like it slows down. You're hyper focused, yet you're also simultaneously extremely calm. It's like the best feeling ever. And however, to get into this state, you have to have some type of fear stimulus in all the studies that have been done. But the key is the fear can't be so profound that you tip over the edge. There's a tipping point where you will fall apart and cortisol will take over, and everything you do will be greatly impaired. But if you can walk that fine line you will do better than you would in any other circumstance. So I think, you know, in my career, in my own life, and in various different situations where I had that happen, where I'm afraid, but I'm not so afraid that I can't function at all, that it's helped me perform better than I would otherwise.
Well, that's a great answer, because it just kind of speaks to any situation in life. Having that know-how, or that know-how to stay calm, is something that just, you know, serves well in whatever you're doing. That's an amazing story with the engine failure, because you traveled so far, and luckily that most of the engine held together for you until the very end. And that's just amazing. When pilots hear about other pilots having an emergency, it's just riveting, because they want to learn everything they can about, well, if that ever happened to me, how would I handle that? And so every story like yours is just very educational, and, you know, just in terms of the takeaways. And that was great that you were able to explain, you know, step by step what you did. Thank you.
I'm also thinking, Amanda, a couple of weeks ago, we had a race car driver called Alexander Rossi that I'll link the video here. And Alex talked about when he's in a race car, how he looks ahead and how his whole perception slows down. And the farther he looks ahead, the more slow everything gets. And then he's able to navigate through, you know, everything that's happening in
Yes.
a racetrack.
He's in a flow state. So it's like the Matrix. I feel like this is, you know, with special effects in movies, you could picture it. And I still remember that day and other times in my life when I've had moments like this, where it's bizarre. But like everything becomes quiet. You hear only what you need to hear. You're moving really quickly, but in what you see is that everything is happening slowly, and you have this perception that is extremely heightened beyond what you would normally have. And it's one of my favorite things about flying. It's one of my favorite things about my job. It's a life goal. If I could get into this state 24/7, I think that would make me happy, or happier.
You touched on your recent multi-engine training, and with women in aviation getting a lot of attention with the times that there are achievements where women help other women get there. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect in the flying career that you had previously starting out, and as well as your recent experience?
I had a great experience with that rating. I had my first two women instructors, Sarah and Laura. They were both fantastic. All of my prior instructors had been men. And anybody who knows me knows I'm totally a girl power person. So to have had that at my most advanced rating taught just by women was really fantastic. And they were great. So I'm not sure if many of the viewers will be aware of this statistic, but it remains in aviation largely dominated by men. I think the latest data is that maybe somewhere around 7% of all pilots are women. So that means that 93% are men. It's interesting. In medicine, this has very much evened out. But for some reason in aviation, it hasn't. And I find that very curious, because there was a time, you know, years and years ago, before I was a medical student, that medicine was very male dominated also. But it has, there's certain specialties that are very much female dominated these days. And either way, it's 50-50. And there's some data that's suggesting more physicians are actually women now than men. So I think I'm a little frustrated by the fact that somehow this has not carried over into aviation. And I don't know why that is. But I can say that when I was growing up, I don't know that I had any exposure to women who were flying. You know, I didn't see this. My father was an AME, and he had his private pilot's license, but didn't have any ratings beyond that. but I didn't see any women flying. Once in a while, I'd be on a commercial flight and have a woman who was flying the airplane, but not somebody that I ever got to really connect with or meet. I went to an all-girls school growing up from second grade to 12th grade, and my mom is very much a powerful woman. She's a physician, not a pilot. Everything I do that's kind of daredevil oriented is from the genes on my dad's side of the family. But I think it is important for women to encourage other women, and to make it very clear that you're not limited in any way. Aviation, I think, is a great industry, and there are many facets to it. And I hope that in my own lifetime, that I'll be able to see that some of these numbers change a little bit. I think that there's signs that things like that are happening. It seems to me that a few years back they were reporting that women comprise maybe 5% of pilots. So it seems to have grown a little bit. It's just happening slowly. But and I see on social media in particular, I definitely see that there seems to be an increased interest in younger women, especially, who really have their whole lives ahead of them. I follow a lot of different pages that are that support women pilots, and I see people from across the country and even across the world, that are getting their licenses when they're in high school, and that are looking at pursuing aviation as a career. I'm a member of the 99s. That's kind of my local connection to a bigger group, the International Organization of Women Pilots. Yeah, I think I hope that we keep making strides in that direction. And I will say one other thing. I think women are known for being good at multitasking. And I think this is something that's on the X chromosome. And this is a skill that is exceedingly important in aviation, and it comes naturally to women. I also think that women are particularly good at situational awareness. Just in genetics of women taking care of families and their children, they're forced to sort of divide their attention all the time. And I almost think it's ingrained in women's DNA to be good at a lot of the things that are required to fly well.
Well said. We have a episode coming up here in the next couple of weeks. We're going to have somebody else from aviation. She's a flight attendant for a major U.S. air carrier, and she's going to talk about how the role of women has evolved. And you're exactly right that statistics is actually getting more and more. She mentioned to us in our pre-interviews that she now routinely flies with more women pilots in the cabin compared to what it was when she started 25 years, 26 years ago. So I think it's just a matter of time.
I have to tell you, my favorite moments now flying in and out of Albany International are when everyone I'm talking to, Albany Tower, Albany Departure, Albany Ground, it's all women. And when I hear all of the airlines coming in, and I have this moment, I mean, I wouldn't say it's few and far between. There are times when all the major airlines are coming in or taking off, and that every single controller is a woman. And I love that. That makes my day.
I want to shift gears a little bit, but you also have integrated flying into your lifestyle now. It's almost a necessity for you, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So my husband is a general surgeon, and he currently works at Oswego Health, which is in Oswego up on Lake Ontario. So this is not a short drive. It's if you drive the speed limit, it's probably about a 3-hour drive. So they actually have a great little airport there. It's not a heavily traveled airport, just north of Syracuse. That's the closest bigger airport. But they have every service that you need. They have a heated hangar that they hardly charge me anything for in the winter. And they have uh, 2 runways, and they've got multiple instrument approaches. So since he moved there, I typically will fly to Oswego, one of our flying club airplanes, usually my favorite, 854 Gulf Whiskey. So because of my work schedule, I always work 2 weekends a month. So sometimes I go in the middle of the week. But either way, I would say at least twice a month, sometimes more, depending on his call schedule and my work schedule. I'll go for a few days. In July, usually I go for like 7 or 8 days. Yes, it's depending on what I'm getting in terms of a headwind. I can get there. If I'm lucky, I can get there in an hour. Sometimes it's a little bit longer than that. It's either way much more enjoyable than driving, and typically faster, as long as I don't run into any snafus on the ground that detain me from taking off when I intend to.
And your husband is not a pilot, I take it.
He's not. No, he's a very educated right seat passenger. I do think that if there were ever an emergency and I was indisposed, for some reason, something happened to me physically and I couldn't land the airplane, I think as long as the conditions weren't particularly challenging, I think that he could do it. If he didn't have a perfect landing, I'm pretty sure that he could do it safely enough that people wouldn't be injured.
Yeah, a lot of CFIs, either formally or informally, can do training for passengers who fly routinely and to be able to safely land.
I was just going to mention that I love doing that type of training. It's very rewarding and it gives people a lot of confidence, when they're flying with people frequently.
So now flying is not just a hobby, it is part of your lifestyle.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I have to say, so prior to him having that job, I'll definitely, when I have a day off, I will take longer flights. The furthest I've gone is to the National Air Force Museum in Ohio. There I spent the night because that was pretty far. And I fly a lot, but because I work an evening shift and I don't start work until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the airport is on the way to the hospital where I work, I'll frequently do short local flights before work. But I have not really used it as a means of transportation that was necessary routinely until my husband took that job. There is no limit to this. And the more that you learn, the more you realize that you don't really know anything at all. And all of that makes things that you find interesting to begin with that much more exciting and intriguing. So I have a lot of ideas about what I want to pursue with aviation. I'm not 100% sure, but like other things I've experienced in life, I often think that things will come along and present themselves that will help lead me down the path that is meant to be the right one for me. So I have these feelers out in various different areas, and I think as some more time goes by, it'll become clear which ones are the best to pursue next.
Well, we just hope that all your dreams come true, and you've been so successful with everything you have touched. And I love your dreaming of everything. I like how you're approaching it, your spirit. So and your business idea slash helping people is fantastic. So hope everything works for you. Before we go, I do want to go back or go and talk a little bit about, you got like a million other interesting hobbies slash activities. So quickly take us through, what else do you get involved in? And most importantly, where do you find the time?
That's a good question. So I think So we touched on skiing, that's very much a part of my life. That's definitely my favorite sport, in that arena. And I'm very artistically inclined. I think that's the other area that is different than some of the things we've talked about so far. So I actually majored in music in college, voice and piano. Well, I began as a pianist, and I then became more voice oriented through my years in college. Since then, so originally I'm a classically trained pianist. So in more recent years, I taught myself how to play the electric guitar. I'm not, I don't want you to think I'm Lenny Kravitz. I'm not, not particularly good at it. I can do basic things. And the other thing that I pursue and probably do the most often particularly in the last 3 or 4 years is paint. I have an art studio in my house, and I have everything very accessible. Since my husband and I built the house that we live in now, and moved in the fall of 2021, that was something I really wanted. I used to paint in our garage in our townhouse, and I wanted my own designated space where I could mess things up, and everything was right there. And I had a sink in the room, and didn't have to destroy the garage and then clean it up later. But I think I really am at heart an artist. And I think that everything that I love, medicine and flying, skiing, I think it's all an art. I don't see any of this as a scientific algorithm. I never have. And that's what I think is beautiful about all of these different things that I love personally. You're never going to be as good as you could be unless you can view it that way. And you can learn it maybe from that perspective. And you have to use both sides of your brain to manage an emergency. You can't, I think that you're never going to be as successful with things if you are just very linear in your thinking. And the airplane I had the engine failure in, I have that cylinder, and it's part of a painting that I did, a 3-dimensional painting.
Wow.
What a fascinating story. I mean, it feels like every story you're telling is like, wow, tell me more. I got to tell you, you're making it hard for me because I'm trying to think of a title for this episode. So far, I have a doctor, pilot, skiing, painting, guitarist. Uh, uh, it's probably like 600 things I forgot.
Entrepreneur now, we can add that to the list.
Entrepreneur, businesswoman. So you're going to make our life a little harder trying to come up with a title that can fit.
I didn't know how to do this when I was younger. I would really put a lot of eggs in one basket, and I would let everything else deteriorate. And as I got older, I realized that there was a way to do this. I just needed to be a little bit more moderate in the way I was approaching it, and I needed to not waste hours of the day, waste maybe even minutes doing things that were not fulfilling to me. And yeah, I think that's the way that I do it now. It gives me energy.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think sounds like you know what you want, you know what you're passionate about, you know what you want to spend time on, and you organize your life around it. So that's fantastic. We really appreciate you taking your time to join and tell your story. I think that we can have another 2 hours of interesting stories with you. So maybe in the future we'll have you back. But before we let you go, what's your Instagram, other social media handles? Maybe we'll put it in the description.
Of course. So my Instagram is Amanda Stahl MD. Just my name and the letters MD. Easy to find. And yes, I do have a private account, but I'm happy, if people want to follow me that are watching the podcast, happy to accept them as followers. So please don't hesitate to ask.
Thank you so much for sharing this wide variety of stories that really all come together and how you live an inspired life. And I think everyone will really enjoy hearing the details and then the big picture, because bringing it all together is, I think, really what makes people curious to explore those new things that you've touched on today. So thank you so much.
Oh, it was my great pleasure. I'm very honored that you guys asked me to be on the podcast. So thank you very much.
Aviation